I am the new heir to this company. These words echoed through the elegant boardroom of Peterson Holdings like thunder on a clear day. The entire board turned simultaneously to face the source of that impossible statement, a 16-year-old black teenager standing at the entrance with a faded backpack on her shoulders and sneakers that had seen better days. Richard Peterson, the Millionaire CEO sitting at the head of the mahogany table, let out a laugh so loud it made the crystals on the chandelier rattle. You, he turned to the other executives, wiping away a tear from laughing so hard. Girl, you shouldn't even be on this floor. Did the janitor let his daughter bring him lunch? Alexis Williams took a deep breath. Her eyes scanned every face in the room, all white, all male, all wearing suits that cost more than a year's rent in her neighborhood. But there was something in her posture, a calmness unusual for someone who should have been intimidated. My name is Alexis Williams, she repeated, this time with a firmness that cut through the laughter like a knife. And I've come to claim my rightful inheritance from this company. The CFO, James Crawford, adjusted his glasses and muttered to his colleague, "Security is getting incredibly lax with these people." The comment didn't go unnoticed by Alexis, but she just smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She walked further into the room, the squeak of her old sneakers against the marble floor the only sound in the sudden silence. "Listen, girl," Richard stood up, his imposing height casting a shadow over her. "I don't know what TikTok prank you're trying to pull, but I suggest you get out of here before I have you arrested for trespassing." Alexis didn't flinch. She slowly swung her backpack around to her chest. "Before you do that, Mr. Peterson, you might want to explain to your board why you've been sitting in my chair for the last 14 years.
Richard's face twisted into a sneer. "Your chair? This is a Fortune 500 company, not a folding table at a community center. Get out!" Alexis didn't move. Instead, she unzipped her old backpack and pulled out a yellowed, slightly crumpled folder. "Before you call security, you might want to take a look at this." The executives exchanged incredulous glances as she slid the documents across the polished mahogany table. Richard hesitated, but curiosity and a flicker of unease got the better of him. He picked up the papers. As he read the first page, the color began to drain from his face. DNA test, birth certificate, last will and testament, he muttered, his hands trembling almost imperceptibly. "Impossible!" "Is it?" Alexis asked softly. Just 6 months prior to this scene, Alexis had been living a completely different life. She was the daughter of a cleaning lady, raised by her grandmother in a small apartment after her mother's early death. She had grown up believing her father was a nobody who ran off. She never imagined she would discover, while going through her grandmother's attic, that she was the daughter of Thomas Peterson, Richard's younger brother and the brilliant co-founder of this very company. Thomas had died in a mysterious car accident when she was only 2 years old, taking the secret of his illegitimate daughter to the grave. Or so everyone thought. "Thomas never," stammered Richard, looking up from the papers with wild eyes. "Thomas never told me about a daughter." "Is strange," Alexis tilted her head, feigning surprise. "Because he made it very clear in his will that if anything happened to him, I should receive my share of the company when I turned 16. The silence in the room was so thick you could hear the ticking of the Swiss clock on the wall. Alexis watched every reaction, every micro-expression of panic on the faces around the table. It was as if she were reading a book she already knew by heart. James Crawford, the CFO, leaned over to look at the papers. "Even if these documents are incredulous," he sneered, "they could be forged. Anyone with a printer and access to the internet can fake a paternity test these days." Richard seized on the excuse immediately. He tossed the papers back onto the table dismissively. "Exactly. This is a shakedown. A poor girl looking for a payout. You can call Genesis Laboratory right now to confirm it. Verification code 7834B. They keep records for 5 years. Go ahead, Mr. Crawford. Put it on speaker." The awkward silence that followed was suffocating. No one reached for the phone. They didn't want to confirm the truth. They wanted her gone. "Listen here, girl." Richard slammed his hand on the table, standing up again to use his height to intimidate her. "Even if Thomas really is your father, which I doubt, that doesn't mean you have the right to show up here 14 years later demanding anything. You don't understand how this world works. You don't understand business." "Actually," Alexis said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously serious, "I understand a lot more than you think."
Richard let out a sharp, dismissive breath and turned his back on her, walking over to the panoramic window that offered a view of the city he believed he owned. "You think you can just show up here and claim something you didn't build?" He gestured vaguely at the skyline. "You have no education, no experience. You don't understand the complexities of running a billion-dollar corporation. You think this is a game?" It was at that moment that Alexis revealed the first real card in her hand. "Actually, Mr. Peterson, I understand the state of this company very well," she said, her voice steady. "For example, I know that Peterson Holdings is currently facing a sealed federal lawsuit for racial discrimination in hiring practices. I know you lost 3 major defense contracts this year due to compliance issues. And I know the board is secretly pushing for significant changes in leadership because stock prices have dropped 12% in the last quarter." Richard's jaw dropped. He spun around from the window. James Crawford nearly choked on his water. "How?" Richard began, his voice cracking. "That is confidential information. That barely circulates in the executive corridors. Who have you been talking to?" But Alexis continued relentlessly, stepping closer to the table. "I also know that Thomas didn't just die in a car accident, as the official report says. He was coming to pick me up from daycare when it happened. He had been picking me up every Tuesday and Thursday for 2 years religiously since my mother died." Her voice remained steady, but there was an old, deep pain behind the words. Human Resources Director Michael Torres, who had remained silent until then, whispered to his colleague next to him, "How does she know that? We scrubbed those logs." Alexis turned to him with the precision of a radar. "Because unlike you, Mr. Torres, I did my homework. I talked to the daycare owner. I found photos. I located the cleaning staff who worked here at the time, the secretaries you fired, the drivers you ignored. You think you erased Thomas from the company's history, but you forgot one thing." She leaned forward, placing both hands on the mahogany table. "You forgot that real people remember real people, and those people talk when you treat them with respect, something you wouldn't know anything about." Richard's face was now a mask of barely controlled anger. The girl wasn't just a nuisance anymore. She was a leak, a liability. "Even if all of this is true," Richard snarled, "you are a minor. You cannot take on corporate responsibilities. You have no standing here without a legal guardian." "True," Alexis nodded, a glint of triumph in her eyes. "I can't run it alone, but I can have a legal guardian act on my behalf until I turn 18. Someone with experience in corporate management, someone with intimate knowledge of the history of Peterson Holdings." James Crawford laughed bitterly, regaining some of his composure. "And where exactly would a girl from the projects find someone like that? Who would want to associate with—" He stopped mid-sentence as the heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open again.
An elegant black woman, approximately 45 years old, entered with the confidence of someone who knows every inch of that building. She wore an impeccable charcoal suit and carried a leather briefcase that seemed to contain the weight of the world. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice cutting through the air like sharp silk. "I believe Mr. Crawford was asking who would want to associate with Miss Williams." The blood drained from Richard's face faster than it had when he saw the DNA test. "Margaret?" he stammered. "Margaret Collins?" "Former vice president of operations at Peterson Holdings," Margaret clarified for the younger executives who didn't recognize her. "I worked directly with Thomas Peterson for 8 years before deciding to pursue other horizons." "We fired you," Richard hissed, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "We gave you a severance package to disappear 3 years ago." "You forced me out because I asked too many questions," Margaret corrected with a cold smile, placing her briefcase on the table next to Alexis. "And now I've come to meet my new client. Alexis contacted me 2 months ago. I must say I was impressed with her research into the true history of this company." Alexis remained seated, but now there was something different about her posture. No longer was she a teenager alone against a corporate empire. Now she was a claimant with a powerful general who knew where every skeleton in the building was buried. 2 months? Richard repeated, reality beginning to form in his mind like a storm cloud. "Actually 3, Alexis corrected again, her voice gaining a new firmness. "It took me a while to track down Margaret, but it was worth every minute. Especially when she told me about the real circumstances that led Thomas to drive alone that night." James Crawford swallowed hard, looking between Richard and Margaret. "What is she talking about?" Margaret clicked the latches of her briefcase open. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. She pulled out an old handheld audio recorder. "Thomas called me the night of the accident," Margaret said, holding the device up. "He was upset, disturbed by a discovery he had made about financial irregularities in the company accounts. He said he was going to confront someone at the office before picking up his daughter." The silence in the room was so thick you could hear the air conditioning humming. Richard had turned completely pale. "He never made it to the office," Margaret continued, her eyes locking onto Richard's. "The accident happened 3 blocks before he arrived. Very convenient, don't you think?" "That proves nothing," Richard shouted, though his voice lacked its usual boom. "Thomas was stressed. He was imagining things." "Was he?" Alexis asked. "Because Margaret kept the voicemail, and unlike the company records you deleted, this tape has been kept safe for 15 years.
Richard stared at the device in Margaret's hand as if it were a bomb about to explode, which, in a way, it was. "You can't prove anything with a grainy 15-year-old recording," he said, forcing a scoff. "Thomas was unwell. Everyone knew that. He was paranoid." Alexis leaned forward, her fingers tapping softly on the table. "Paranoid," she repeated. "It's interesting you use that word, Mr. Peterson, because I found that word used a lot in the HR files regarding Robert Davidson." For a moment, all the men in the room seemed to forget how to breathe. "Who?" Michael Torres asked, his voice trembling. "Robert Davidson," Alexis said, opening her backpack again and pulling out a tablet. She tapped the screen and slid it toward the center of the table. "Senior accountant at Peterson Holdings from 1998 to 2008. The man responsible for the reports Thomas was reviewing the night of his death." She looked up, meeting Richard's terrified gaze. "He was fired 2 weeks after Thomas's funeral for unspecified irregularities. He moved to another state immediately. You made sure he couldn't find work in this city ever again." Richard tried to stand up, but his legs gave way, and he sat back down heavily. How did you find Davidson? He disappeared." Alexis smiled, but it was a cold, sharp expression. "Social media is an incredible tool, Mr. Peterson, especially when you know exactly who to look for. I didn't just find him, I visited him. And unlike you, Mr. Davidson has a conscience that has been eating away at him for a decade." Margaret opened a folder from her briefcase and began laying out sheets of paper, one by one, like a dealer laying out a winning royal flush. 10 years of altered financial reports," Margaret narrated. "Fictitious contracts, fake invoices for consulting firms that don't exist. A systematic money laundering operation that siphoned more than $20 million from the company. $23,400,000, to be exact,
divided between accounts at 3 different offshore banks, all controlled by a network of shell companies under the name of Clearwater Solutions, a company that, interestingly, has Richard Peterson listed as a minority shareholder. James Crawford was hyperventilating now, loosening his tie as sweat beaded on his forehead. That's impossible. We scrubbed the servers. You never thought anyone would look, Alexis finished for him. You never imagined a girl from the slums would have the intelligence to connect the dots. And you certainly never expected Davidson to keep physical copies of every single transaction. The other board members were now inching their chairs away from Richard and James, the smell of fear and impending doom filling the room. "This is teenage fantasy," Richard whispered, though he looked like a ghost. "You can't prove any of those papers are real." "We don't have to," Margaret said, crossing her arms, "because the IRS is very good at verifying these things once they have a map. And we just drew them a very detailed map."
Alexis rose slowly, her posture radiating an authority that contrasted sharply with her age. For months, she had planned every move, anticipated every reaction, and prepared every counterattack. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a sharp blade, "the time has come to discuss the terms of my mercy." As the executives struggled between panic and disbelief, Alexis stood there as the center of a hurricane she herself had created. She walked slowly around the table, like a predator who had finally cornered its prey. "My proposal is very simple," Alexis said, stopping directly behind James Crawford, who flinched. "You can resign voluntarily, effective immediately, return the stolen money in full, and publicly confess your crimes to the authorities." "Or," Richard asked, his voice shaking with a mixture of fear and rage. "Or," Alexis shrugged, "we let the federal agents waiting in the lobby come up here and drag you out in handcuffs." Richard slammed his fist on the table, standing up so abruptly his chair toppled over backward. The arrogance that had fueled him for decades surged back one last time. "You think you can threaten me?" he shouted, his face turning a violent shade of red. "You are a nobody. You are a child with a backpack and a forged birth certificate. No one will take you seriously against my word. I am Richard Peterson. I built this city. I will bury you and your grandmother so deep in legal fees you'll be begging for that cleaning lady job." Alexis didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She just smiled, a small, satisfied smile. "I was hoping you would say that." She reached up to her backpack strap and tapped a small, innocuous black square clipped to the fabric. A tiny red light blinked once. "Actually, Mr. Peterson, our conversation has been broadcast live for exactly 43 minutes. The silence that followed was absolute. Not even the air conditioning dared to make a sound. "Broadcast live?" James Crawford whispered, his face turning a worrying shade of gray. Margaret opened her laptop, which had been sitting on the table, and turned the screen so everyone could see. On the screen, a YouTube stream titled "Exposing Corruption at Peterson Holdings" was displayed. The viewer count was ticking upward frantically. 17,543 people have watched you admit to corporate fraud in the last 5 minutes. And since you just threatened a minor and insulted my deceased mother on a live stream, the viewer count just jumped to 47,000. Richard stared at the laptop screen. The chat was scrolling so fast it was a blur of angry emojis and demands for justice. You can't," Richard stammered, backing away. "This is illegal. You can't record me without my consent." "Actually," Alexis replied, her eyes gleaming,
In this state, it is completely legal to record conversations when you are a minor documenting possible fraud committed against you. I consulted 3 different lawyers to make sure. You just confessed to the world, Uncle Richard.
This is entrapment, Richard screamed, looking around the room for an exit. I'll have your badge. I'll sue this entire... You can save that for the judge, Mr. Peterson. An authoritative voice sounded from the doorway. 3 federal agents entered the room, followed by 2 local police detectives. The lead agent, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, flashed her badge. I'm Federal Agent Sarah Martinez. Alexis Williams came to us 2 weeks ago with evidence of corporate fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. She approached the table, surveying the scattered documents. We have arrest warrants for Richard Peterson, James Crawford, and Michael Torres. No! James Crawford suddenly bolted, trying to scramble toward the side door. One of the detectives intercepted him effortlessly, spinning him around and cuffing him as he muttered incoherently about misunderstandings and just following orders. Michael Torres sat frozen in his chair, tears streaming silently down his face. My family, he whispered, staring at Alexis's laptop. My children are going to see this. But Richard was still trying to fight. He backed against the window, his chest heaving. You can't prove anything based on a teenager's word. That recording was doctored. It's a deepfake. Alexis opened her backpack one last time. I had a feeling you'd say that. She pulled out a different tablet. Remember Mr. Davidson, our repentant accountant? Well, he didn't just keep paper copies. He was very fond of security cameras. She pressed play on a video file. The image projected onto the large boardroom screen. It showed Richard Peterson in his office 3 years ago, clearly instructing Davidson on how to mask illegal transfers. The audio was crystal clear. Make sure nothing can be traced back to me. If anyone finds out, you take all the blame. I have too much protection to go down for a few million. The blood drained completely from Richard's face. The agents moved in. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Richard finally lost all composure. The mask of the sophisticated CEO fell away, revealing the hateful man underneath. You don't know who you're messing with, he spat at Alexis, struggling against the agents. I have contacts. I have influence. I will destroy you, you little gutter rat. I will send you and your family of slum dwellers back to the filth you crawled out of. The room went deadly silent. Alexis looked down at her phone. And there it is. She turned the screen to face him. The chat just exploded. 80,000 people just watched you call a black family slum dwellers while being arrested for stealing millions. You didn't just lose your freedom, Richard. You just lost the court of public opinion forever. Richard stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing, realizing the magnitude of his mistake. But the real irony, Alexis said, stepping closer to him as the agents held him back, is that my father, Thomas, left very specific instructions in his real will, the one Davidson kept a copy of. Margaret stepped forward, handing a final document to the lead agent. Thomas foresaw that his brother might try to steal his daughter's inheritance, so he set up a trust fund holding 51% of the company's voting shares, which would automatically transfer to Alexis upon her 16th birthday. 51%? Richard whispered, horrified. An absolute majority, Alexis confirmed, which means that legally, as of yesterday, I am the controlling owner of Peterson Holdings. She looked him dead in the eye, her expression calm and cold. And my first decision as owner is to terminate your employment for cause effective immediately. Get him out of my building.
6 months after the day that changed everything, Alexis Williams sat in the same conference room where she had once been ridiculed. But the air in the room was different now. Lighter. Cleaner. The mahogany table was filled with new faces. competent executives of diverse backgrounds, women and men whom she had personally helped interview. Peterson Holdings, now rebranded as the Williams Peterson Corporation, had become the fastest-growing company in the industry. The meeting with the investors was a success, Margaret Collins reported, sitting at the head of the table as the new CEO. She smiled at Alexis, who sat to her right as the chairwoman of the board. They want to expand our college scholarship initiative for young people from underserved communities. They love the new direction. Alexis nodded, looking out the same panoramic window where Richard used to project his power. But she didn't see a kingdom to rule. She saw a community to serve. Below, she could see children playing in a new park the company had funded on a lot that had sat empty for decades. "You know what's ironic?" Alexis said, turning to Margaret. "Richard spent his whole life trying to keep people like us out of power because he thought we would ruin the company. In the end, it was a girl from the suburbs who built the empire he always dreamed of having." The company had not only recovered the stolen $23 million, but had tripled its profits by implementing transparent, ethical practices. The stock price was at an all-time high. And for the men who had tried to erase her? Richard Peterson was currently serving the first year of a 15-year sentence for corporate fraud, embezzlement, and perjury. The video of his racist outburst had been viewed over 10 million times, ensuring that even when he got out, he would be a social pariah. James Crawford had lost his home, his family, and had declared bankruptcy after a tidal wave of civil lawsuits. And Michael Torres was now working as a stocking clerk at a discount department store, his corporate career destroyed forever. Alexis's cell phone vibrated with a notification. It was a message from Davidson, the former accountant who had provided the crucial evidence. Attached was a photo of him holding a law degree. He was finishing school, funded by the newly established Thomas Peterson Foundation for Second Chances. Alexis smiled, putting her phone away. She had learned that true revenge was not destroying her enemies. It was building something so extraordinary that their malice became completely irrelevant. That teenager who walked into a boardroom with an old backpack and worn-out sneakers had proven something fundamental. Underestimating someone based on prejudice is not only morally wrong, it is strategically stupid. In the end, Richard Peterson was not defeated by hatred or violence. He was defeated by intelligence, preparation, and a young woman who turned every obstacle into fuel for something greater. The best revenge, Alexis had discovered, is to achieve the success your oppressors claimed you were incapable of handling. If this story touched your heart and showed you that intelligence always wins over arrogance, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of people who turned injustice into inspiring victories.